So, welcome back to the Science and Art of Open Water Swimming. Today, I'm joined with someone I've known for a very long time, Felicity Sheedy-Ryan, or as most of you will know, Flick. Many of you know her from her outstanding triathlon career, where she became an Australian national champion, Oceania champ, represented Australia at the Elite World Triathlon Champs numerous times, and went on to win a couple of duathlon world titles. I had the privilege of coaching Flick for close to 10 years, and one of those things I've always admired in her was her ability to adapt, refocus, and rebuild through different phases of her career. In recent years, she's had periods where injuries have limited running volume, which opened up the door to spending more time in the water, not as a replacement for running, but as another avenue for training, a challenge and progression. That shift has led her to take on the Roto duo again, and eventually a step up to the solo. So that brings us to the heart of what today's conversation is about. In 2024, Flick attempted her first solo crossing of Rottnest Channel, only for the event to be abandoned mid-race, something that would test any athlete. She returned in 2025 and completed the solo, carrying everything she'd learned from that first disappointment. And now, after the 2026 Rottnest Channel Swim has again been cancelled, it felt like the right time to talk with someone who understands what it means to commit deeply to a goal and have it taken away and then find another path forward. So today we'll explore where Flick is now across sport, training and life, and what the past few years have taught her about resilience, identity and the long game in the open water. So Flick, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Good to chat again, Grant.
It's always good to catch up and have a chat. So a lot of people listening will know you from your triathlon perspective, but in the last few years, you've branched out a little bit more with some other events. So you did some running and duathlon, obviously, but swimming has sort of been something you've had a little bit more time for. But if beyond that racing career, beyond being an athlete, how do you introduce yourselves these days? Who is Flick outside of the water?
Yeah, so obviously the triathlon dominated my life for 20 years. And, you know, as getting a bit older and a few injuries have started to shift that, I guess, like anything in life, you have to start looking to other things as well. So although I'm still doing a lot of training at the moment, I am now working a lot more as well. So I currently am a hydrotherapy instructor and work with some people with a lot of musculoskeletal problems and arthritis, and that's been really nice, a change, and probably not the area I saw myself branching into, but definitely one I've actually learned to quite enjoy. And it's been a nice mix of incorporating, I guess, my athletic background, my uni degree of, some sports science stuff, and also my teaching degree. And I found this is actually, although these guys are certainly not elite athletes by any stretch, it's a really nice amalgamation of all those things. So, that's what I'm spending a lot more of my time now, and, making sure I'm still getting lots of swimming and running and gym, etc., and training in. And anyone that knows me probably outside of that as well knows I'm a big bird mum and animal lover, so a lot of my spare time goes around into like hanging out with my pets and stuff as well. So that's probably me in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, I had expected some birds in the background today.
Yeah, I had to trap them outside so that they jibby in the background.
And it's really great to hear that you're actually been able to bring not only your background from the sport you've had, but your education through sports science to bring that into the work space that you are in now. As I said, the focus today is looking at the Roto Swim and potentially how people are feeling around the event being cancelled. So your first solo attempt was back in 2024.
Correct.
I'm interested to know why you decided to commit to doing the event in that year.
Yeah, so a couple of things, I guess, converged for that. It's sort of always been a bit of a bucket list. I never came from a swimming background in my triathlon days, as you'll know. And it's something I had to work extremely hard for to get better at. So I guess in my later years of triathlon and trying to make the Olympics, I spent a lot more time in the water, and I put a huge focus on swimming, and that became priority, and sort of volume up, intensity up, and I became a much stronger swimmer. So I guess that was starting to lay the foundation. I never had the time or ability to contemplate a solo in my full-time training years, and didn't really fit with what I was doing, and the calendar and the extra that was needed to put into to complete a solo compared to duos, etc. So I felt like the time was right. And I guess the big push for me was I had surgery on my knee, and an injury that had really dented my career and had a huge impact, a lot more than I ever thought it would. And coming back from that, it was just the running load was been really hard on my body at that point as I was trying to get back into it. So I sort of came to the conclusion that I needed to just back off a little bit in the meantime to give it a bit more time, and I'd take a huge shift to swimming. And I think the main drive for me was, to be perfectly honest, that rehab period. And I guess this will tie into sort of dealing with setbacks and disappointment. But, behind the scenes, I guess what people didn't see is just how much this injury and the rehab was really starting to break me, and heartbreak, because none of it had gone to plan. I'd really set myself up with everything and given 100% to make that work. And I pretty much came to setback. My surgery essentially failed, and I was rehabbing a still broken leg, which we found out, months down the track. And after doing everything, and that just became quite challenging mentally. Everything I'd set my goals for, and coming back to racing, and races I'd penciled in, assuming we'd be back in that time frame, like they just all fell wayward. And pain and discomfort and problems, and further injuries because of what was going on. So I felt at that point that swimming is something that I could still do without too much being hindered by limitations or outside of my control. And I really needed a challenge. And I got to the point where I hadn't had any satisfaction from the races I was doing. Finishing running races 2 minutes slower than what I knew I could be. And I'd done all it before, and there was no new goals, and I was limited in setting new goals because my body wouldn't allow me to at that point. And so, Rottnest stepped up, and yeah, mentally, I really needed something to remind myself that I could still do hard things, and kind of ask myself the question, do I still have it in me? You start to doubt yourself, and question your mental and your identity, and what you can do. And not being the swimming background, and Rottnest for me was quite a daunting event. It's really kind of outside of my comfort zone, and I thought that was the perfect time for me to step up. And I think I really needed something positive in my life at the moment, something that I actually could achieve and succeed, because everything I had done in the last 8-10 months was just falling and breaking down. No matter what I did, and no matter how I tried, nothing worked for me. Everything was a disappointment, and it was 2 steps forward, 2 steps back continuously. So the swim was like quite important to me mentally at that time, to just teach myself to reset a goal again, commit myself to it, and actually, prove to myself that I still was able to do hard things, do hard work, still have mental resilience, and test myself on that sort of grit and challenge. And that was the main drive for me. I thought that was the perfect year for me to jump into something like that.
Because your identity, I guess, for nearly 20 years up until that point was bound around this being an elite triathlete, being a professional athlete. And so when injuries had an impact on your ability to train and compete at the level that you're used to, it's obviously had an impact on your sense of self, and questioning who you are, and then having to reframe who you are going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess through my career, I've always probably thought it's one of my strong points that I've had, is I've never really doubted my headspace or the resilience I had. But the old get knocked down 7, get up 8. I just feel like I was at 700 and having to get up again. And you just sort of ask yourself, how many times can I keep fighting this, and to have no rewards? I think that was the main thing, is I'd put so much effort in and so much things behind the scenes. And on the outside, there was no drastic thing for people to look at and see the story. I looked normal on the outside, but the things weren't working at all for me, and everything I did came with no rewards. So yeah, it was time to I felt like I needed that for myself, and just to almost for my brain to have a break and be given some positive reinforcement for effort, because it just felt like it was no effort. And I've always believed in, hard work and you get results from this. And, it was kind of that reality of sometimes life's just not fair and it doesn't work like that. And so I had to try and shift that focus for a while into something different and move that energy somewhere else to kind of have a little bit of a break and time out from what had become all consuming for me to try and get myself back moving the way I wanted it to be. And I think that's where you needed that little self identity help and something positive to come back into my life in the athletic domain.
So, with that change into that swim focus, has it changed your view of yourself as being an athlete?
Well, it's funny, I guess, because you probably know growing up, like I guess self-talk's important. And I probably always labeled myself as the non-swimmer because essentially I wasn't. But with all those years leading in, I said to trying to get that Olympic selection, and swimming was the sticking point for me. And then, through these injuries, like, I mean, that's the beauty from coming from a triathlon background, is knowing how good cross training still is for you. And I've had a few first-hand experiences that where I was actually mind blown at the fitness I carried over from swimming and swimming hard. So yeah, I guess there's certainly been a shift, especially as I had to take a step back from triathlon, and that's been hard because you really like to maintain that elite capacity. And I guess now I still, I guess I reframe myself as, yeah, I am a good swimmer. I'm not an elite swimmer, but I became a good swimmer and a strong swimmer. And I certainly over the years that was evident. I went from quite, poor and terrible to, a strong swimmer, still shifting that mentality from I can't compete at the pointy end of things in swimming. I can be good, but I can't be great. And I don't have that ability to be that level. That's still quite hard because you still carry the elite mentality into a lot of what you do, but you're not actually that good.
Yeah, to be at the pointy end within the elite world triathlon scene, you need to be a good swimmer. You recognise that you weren't the best of swimmers in there, but at the same time, to win a national title and to race at Worlds and be ranked in the top 20 in the world, you need to have a good swim. It obviously highlighted that you're a two-time duathlon world champion where swimming's not involved, but but through that time, you still are or have been a good swimmer. And if we look back, you did 4 or 5 duos through about 2010 to 2015, somewhere in there. So, I mean, that was during the triathlon season. You were fit, and it was just getting in there and getting a 10K session in, but still swimming quite quickly across. So, if we just going back again to that race in 2024. How far through the event were you before it was abandoned? And then when that happened, what went through your mind?
Yeah. So I would have been just shy of 13Ks. And I know that because when they originally called the event, they allowed anyone that was further than 13Ks to continue. And when the team stopped me, to be honest, at first I thought they were joking and taking the piss. And I was like, I'm not stopping. This is ridiculous. And, like, no, you got to. And there was definitely my first thing when they said, you've got to be at 13K. And I was like, well, where am I? And, you read 12 point something, 5, 7. And I was like, absolutely not. There is no way I am getting pulled short because I felt amazing. Even in those conditions, I felt so good that year and so strong, and I put so much effort in. And then the other part of me was, this is a bit of an ego thing, but I was like, I can't believe I haven't made a cutoff. Like, I was like, this has never even crossed my mind that I wouldn't be good enough to get across somewhere. And, then I thought, my God, how far back am I? Everyone must be like so far ahead. And they're like, no, you're fine. There's not many people. So I was just like, no way. So yeah, I kind of just hung in the water for a little bit and almost like refused to get in the boat. I kind of didn't want it to end. Again, you'd put so much into it. And like I just said before, not all of this went straight through my head, but I was just like, this can't be another thing that's like been taken away from me. I was like, this is the only thing that I can do and achieve and succeed. And right now I'm nailing it, like to my ability. The conditions were horrible, they were horrific, but I wasn't phased by them at all. And I felt great. My energy was good. My mentality was good. We were still cracking jokes. My shoulders weren't sore. I knew I'd done the work. I was confident in the type of training that I had done, that I would probably only get stronger as the race went. And so to be pulled a few short, I was pretty dark. And then getting on the boat when I saw conditions that made sense. And then I've got to say, I was actually happy in a sense that anyone further on then got pulled, because I don't think I would have got over that one quite as easily than the whole field being pulled out. So yeah, I was massively bummed, but I guess at the time I didn't want to show that. I still had a bunch of crew that had put themselves on the line for me and were having a much worse day than I was up until that point. My cousin was throwing her guts up off the side. I didn't know a boat had gone under another boat and shattered its windscreen, and there was glass all over the boat. All unbeknown to me. My poor paddler was freezing and exhausted from trying to keep up. And I was just in such the zone that year that I was kind of almost blissfully unaware how terrible it was. So yeah, to have that pulled, yeah, it was a big disappointment. When I went into that race, I knew I was coming off elite years of swimming. I knew that wouldn't last forever. Still sort of, I said, carrying over that sort of elite mentality, I went into this and I was like, I want to do one and I want to do it properly. If this is the only one I get to do fast and hard, I put big Ks in, big time, big gyms, big everything. Yeah, so I wasn't sure I'd ever get that same effort put in again. That was pretty hard to swallow at that point.
So did you ever think at sort of around this time then, maybe this isn't for me?
Yeah, look, I certainly thought, like, do you know what? The day panned out well, as I said, and there was some great positives that I could see from that already. There were some things that had worked really well. As you'll probably know from coaching, like, quitting is really hard for me unless it's really in my best interests, I guess. But when it comes to kind of giving up, I don't think I almost had any DNFs in my entire career unless I was forced to, for being lapped out or something. And I'd already committed to, like, ticking that box. So I don't think I ever was decided that, oh, well, this sucks. Like, I'm not coming back for this. I was like, oh, this sucks. God, I'm going to have to do it again. All this training is going to have to go on another year. I just knew I couldn't walk away with that box unfinished, even though the day hadn't gone perfectly.
Yeah, I love how almost straight away there's this disappointment, but you have the ability to look at the positives that came from the day and what you can take from that and how you might be able to improve. So lining up in 2025, you've decided to go again because you want to tick that box, you want to get it done. How did the memory of 2024 sit with you?
Do you know what? So the race itself, like I said, I had a really strange experience, I think, to a lot of people in 2024, where I was so at peace with the conditions and how bad they were, and I just wasn't phased by them. And I don't know if that came from preparation. I don't know if that's just the years of racing, and it is what it is. You just deal with whatever you get dished up on the day. Everybody's in the same boat. You just readjust your goals, and okay, it's not going to be as fast, but I know in that year I had readjusted my goals at that time to be like, okay, well, it's not going to be the fast time I want, but I'm swimming in the worst year Rottnest has ever had. And so my mentality for that was like, well, I'm going to be one of the victors. I'm going to be one of these people that's actually strong enough to conquer this and conquer these conditions, and I'm not going to let it get the best of me. So I was just kind of in the zone. So I don't really feel like I was too tainted from the racing experience going in to 2025. The difficulty for me actually was I wasn't quite as motivated. You never got that reward at the end. The training for me was a lot harder the following year. I can certainly see why people took a year off to have a break from that. But yeah, the race itself was not the struggle for me. And those conditions, I think I accepted. It was just one of those things that was out of your control. And, it's apart from being pulled out of my own will, I conquered those conditions. I was happy in them. I was fine. I wasn't sick. My food was good. My nutrition. So I said I learned a lot from those things. It was definitely the having to do the training component for the months leading in that was a lot more fatiguing. And that was probably a little bit more daunting for me than the actual event itself.
Yeah. So, other than that training and fatigue and mentally, I suppose, trying to prepare yourself again, what felt different about the second time round?
I certainly had, well, I guess I was more prepared in the sense, in the first year, it was, which is unusual for me in this like sort of stage of my career to be going into something. It's also a bit of the excitement, I guess, from 24 to 25 was I was going into the complete unknown for me. I was going to swim further than I ever had. I didn't know how my nutrition would go. I didn't know if I'd get hypothermic, my shoulders. You didn't know any of that stuff. So that was something I could take from 24 into 25. I had, I guess, a little experience then. I knew my food worked well. I sort of knew what to expect a little bit. So in that sense, that can be both a pro and a con in sometimes in events. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. But yeah, at the same time, there were some things that I didn't, I guess, have to stress about, or I could tick the box and go like, I know what I'm going to do for this. Again, anything can happen on the day, but right now this plan is good for me. It worked before. There's no reason it won't work again. So in that sense, I took some peace and comfort going in, and then the other side of that was there is no way that this is not happening. I don't care what I have to do to get across. I'm getting across. I'm not having this go down 2 years in a row. So, yeah, there was definitely a different drive behind it, even though I knew I wasn't as well prepared. So that was a little disappointing because I didn't feel as strong or as fit or as capable, which is a little hard to swallow. As I said, I always wanted to put one good run on the board and, have something that I could really be proud of in my crossing. And I didn't quite achieve that in my, I feel like I underperformed what I could have in that race, but obviously I got the job done the next year, and that was the main goal.
So, finishing that solo, was it what you expected it to be?
So that's a good question. I think for the most part, yeah, I think I feel the areas that I thought I wouldn't struggle in, I didn't too much. They were certainly tough. And for me, a lot of people worry about keeping their head in the game. And it's funny, that was the one thing that I was really sure that I wouldn't have too much problem with. I knew it would be tough, in those back kilometers, 16 to 18 or something around there where fatigue really sets in and you're not quite close enough to the island yet. And and they were the hard yards. I remember especially that the second year, I remember asking my team when I was, where am I? And they're like, oh, you're 3Ks out. And I swam another 20 or 25 minutes. I'm like, oh, how far now? And they're like, 3K. I was like, don't do this to me. I can see the ground moving beneath me. I know I'm going forwards. And I swam like another feed station, 3K. I was like, oh my God, like, guys, you're breaking me here. So, things like that. They're little things that they were challenging, but, that wasn't my sticking point in the year. Certainly, yeah, there's some fatigue that really sets in and sore shoulders, and you just don't feel like you're even pulling water for a while there, especially, the conditions weren't great in 2025 either. They were certainly passable, but they weren't easy conditions either. So yeah, it probably was pretty similar to what I expected. Things didn't all go to plan, and I guess that's expected. I tried to mitigate that as much as possible, but there was still little mishaps and things like that. So again, things that you can plan and try and do better for next time with some experience.
And did the completion then feel like redemption, or was there's some other feeling crossing the line and finishing?
Yeah, look, it was really nice, like touching back on what I'd said earlier. It had been a really long time in a few years that I had truly done something athletically that gave me some satisfaction or that feeling of accomplishment and achievement. And that's something I loved and searched for. Every race I did, every year I raced competitively. And that was that rug was kind of pulled from me largely because of those injuries. And so I really, I cherished that. It was something really new, and I knew it was something, back in the day when we started, God, we never would have thought you would have seen me swimming 20K to Rottnest. So yeah, I did really like that. But then you can't switch off the other side of your brain and knowing that, I could have done better, and these are the things that went wrong, and these are the improvements, and here was lost time. And little things like that. So there was a mixture, and I think that's a healthy thing, to be satisfied and happy with certain part of the goal, but already that mindset of looking ahead and thinking, well, I could have done this better, and this could have been better. I could have been faster, stronger. This is what I would do next time.
Next time.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. So now talking about the race that didn't happen on the weekend, and there are a lot of swimmers, especially the first timers, would have been in a similar situation to you 2 years ago. What sort of comments or suggestions would you have for them?
I think it's a huge commitment, obviously, especially if you're going to if you were doing solo, right? And you're very valid to be disappointed, devastated, feeling a bit heartbroken, whatever it is. I think that's all. Those feelings are valid, and I think you should feel them, but for a small period of time, and don't let them take over. That would be my first thing: is take your moment to feel sad and peed off and upset, and you think of that. But I think after you felt like that, I don't think you want to dwell on it. I think then you reshift your focus and think what you can use that for. Fitness is never wasted. Time and effort that you've put in, it always goes in the bank somewhere. It might not come to fruition exactly how you want, and you might not get the full use of it always at the time, but it never goes to waste. It's always in the bank. And I also think I would say to swimmers, like, no matter how you're feeling from this, what you do from it is okay. If you want to chuck yourself straight into events, or if you're also like, I'm done, I'm not doing that again, it's a huge commitment. I think you be kind to yourself that both those solutions are okay, because, doing this swim really is the icing on the cake. I think anybody, especially, again, I'm referring mostly to solos, but to anyone, it depends what background you come from. Anyone that's even got themselves into the position to have been eligible to be on the start line to complete an event like that has already done the hard work. They've already proved that they've got a huge degree of grit and resilience and dedication to do the training that's needed to even complete one of these crossings. So I think it's important to also remind yourself that a lot of the hard work was already done. The reward and the fun bit, I guess, didn't get to come across, but I think people can still remind themselves that, when I say back to the start, I needed to show that I could do hard things. The training was the hard things and a huge part of it, because it was a huge commitment to be able to do. And you might have done your first 10K or 3-hour swim or any of these things. So I think that's what I'd be encouraging swimmers to do, is to feel the disappointment. And if that's how you're feeling, and let those emotions come, but then also let them go and refocus on something else that you can do. Maybe there's another event. What did you get out of it? You always got to look for the positives, and just to remind yourself at how much you have already achieved by being able to be on the start line, because it's really, like, you can't underestimate that.
I just talking to the swimmers that I work with, they've gone through that. They've spent some time. They've been a bit down. Some have looked forward to maybe jumping on and doing port to pub. Others are looking at an out of event crossing. Others have said, I'm going to wait till next year. And each person has their own reasons for doing the event or the challenge that they're facing. I mean, some they're still chasing those number plates. What number have you got?
Yeah, I decided to skip on the number plate. I feel like my driving doesn't need to be identified that easily.
I'd really like you to share what your favorite swim set is.
Sure. So this is one I sort of created myself based on, I guess, some methodologies and stuff before. But as you know, I am a big fan of pool gear as well. And especially for an event like Rottnest, a lot of my focus was on strength and strength endurance, as opposed to raw speed. Hence why I feel like in 2024 I was quite equipped for the conditions. So one of my favorite pull sets that I do, and that you can tweak how you do this, but that I would do, I said, largely for some strength based and strength endurance and sort of building a bit of resilience under fatigue, was I would do 8 100s band only, easy. So that might be 5 seconds rest or so, just cruising. Going then into 4 by 200s pull at a tempo pace, and I would drop the time cycle. And then I'd go into 2 400s pull pads hard. So that would be pretty solid again, and I'll be dropping cycle. So it'd be reducing rest as well as increasing pace. And then I would finish off with another 1 by 800 pull pads. Sometimes I would switch out to some smaller paddles to try and get a little bit more speed through this. So I was getting some high turnover, but I would do that as depending on the fitness, either 100 easy, 100 like pretty hard, flat out, continuous, or as I got fitter, it would be more like a tempo into hard. So just changing pace. Yeah, and that's about a 3.2, I think, K main set. So it's a solid set. Yeah, and it's just, I don't know, it's one I feel like I enjoy doing, and I feel like I get strong out of it.
So that set as a place for the type of swimming that you're targeting, at least in terms of being strong and being able to hold the stroke. And I guess partly if we consider how you changed from being a triathlete or coming from a triathlon background where it is a lot of lower body, and then going into swimming, you need to make sure that the upper body can handle that additional load. Having the pull paddles is quite important. So Felicity, do you have a quote that you live by?
Yeah, one that I've used pretty much my whole career that I've loved and I've gone by, and it's, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I've always just tried to use that for any situation, I guess, that comes up, and ask myself again, what type of athlete do I want to be? What do I be known to other people, and what do I want to be known to by myself? And that's something I always wanted to be, proud of, is that I can handle tough things and hard conditions, and that I'm not, might not be the best at swimming or biking or running or whatever avenue, but one thing I won't be outdone by is like giving up or being out toughed in a race, I guess. So that's something that I've often used in a lot of situations.
So just to finish off, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything we didn't cover that you feel is important to that journey, or any other topics you'd like to include?
I guess maybe just a few little things. And I guess this is something that was the hardest thing for me to learn and accept through my injury. You'll see how this ties in a sec. From coming back from my injury and the surgery. So when I finally made that decision to go, I started a timeline, my career was on the line. And again, the mentality I had was, right, I've got one shot at this to do it properly. I'm going to give 110%. I'm not going to be the one that's responsible for this not working because I was lazy or didn't do the work. And so I did my rehab to the nth degree, to the best of my knowledge and advice, and I didn't skip a day. And even on the days I was having a breakdown, and there'd be times I'd go into the gym toilet and I'd just be in tears with pain, and I'd just have to take a breath. And really, it's like, toughen the hell up, Fleet. You just have to go out there and do it again, And so I really put this, as I said, not everybody saw what was going on behind, but I turned up and I front up and I do it again. And the hardest thing I learned from that process was that I actually wasn't in control of it. Like, I did everything that I possibly could, and I had planned in my head, like, I'm going to be this success story because I'm going to do everything better. I'm going to rehab better. I'm going to be stronger, tough. I'm going to do everything right. So my outcome is going to be great because that's what I can control. And the hardest realization for me was that didn't work. Life just threw me lemons in that area, and there was nothing I could do about it. it failed. The surgery failed. It didn't work. The body didn't respond despite doing everything that I could. And mentally, that was so hard, I guess, coming from that athletic background. Not everything always goes like that. And, we know that things outside of your control sometimes that dictate your path. But I was so sure that I was, sort of going to be the maker of my destiny. And, that applies to a lot of things in life. But sometimes life is unfair and things are out of sight of our control. And why I sort of bring this into it is then when you jump forward to things like the swim, and there was nothing I could do about it. And having to accept that and learn that sometimes, no matter how we plan and prepare, that sometimes things happen outside of our control, or situations arise. And so taking that forward into the swim, maybe that was also a bit of the piece, is like, okay, this isn't the perfect day, but I was like, oh well, it is what it is. We be moldable and malleable, and we adapt and we be flexible, and we shift our mindset a little bit to adapt to our new reality that's now in front of us. So that was handling the shitty conditions. And then I think, I had plenty of experience with disappointment already, that I guess that was just second nature to be like, well, we'll just put that in the bin with the rest of the full trash can already. But so I think that's one thing, is that people often like going into sometimes events, and I think the ones that can get bogged down from the disappointment may have been too rigid in their thought process going into, or hadn't accounted for, they'd thought of their plan that they want to do, but they haven't thought of the plan of the things that may happen that they hadn't accounted for, if that makes sense. We all think of our perfect plan, but there's 100 different things that can change that. And for those, especially these guys that have missed out, and especially for those that have tried their solo in 24, and like your poor son Tyson, and a few other friends, it's a really hard pill to swallow. But I still think it just becomes part of the story, and this is the new story that wasn't planned, and maybe it's not the perfect one, but the success that can come from being flexible in that mindset and adaptable. And that's kind of where the resilience comes from, because we can all perform well on a good day when everything's going right, and I think the real test of people comes from when things don't go right. And that's where you really ask yourself, okay, what am I made of? Or something I guess I ask myself after some of these things are like, how much victim versus victor, or what's the person I want to be reacting to this? Like, what's the legacy I want for my sport, or who I am as a athlete? And am I gonna let it crumple, or am I gonna be like, oh, that sucks, and hated that, and God, I'm gonna do all that training all over again? And then I think really you'll find it doesn't always happen at the time, but everyone that's just missed out here and can bounce back from it in their own time or own way, it always just builds, again, goes to the resilience bank. If it's not the fitness bank, it's the, it is cliche, but it is the character building bank. And yeah, I think it was just a matter of remembering your why. You're doing something, and whatever that goal is, or whatever pushed you to that start line or the finish line, some people are going to be happy to leave it behind because that fits with their why or their reasons, and they don't need to do it again. Other people, that's not going to be enough, and they need to come back and tick that box, or for whatever reason. And I think lastly, just to finish off on that, I'll say, just with handling these disappointments and keeping perspective. And I posted something on Instagram after about it, and I just, what I thought's important is, in the big scheme of things, we're still so lucky. Like, if we're even given the opportunity or in a position where we're able to line up to an awesome event like the Rottnest Swim that doesn't exist anywhere in the world really, but there's so many things that factor in that: having enough money, enough time, an able body, sound mind, motivation to actually get yourself in a position where we can enter, and be on the start line. If a cancelled event, if that's the worst that it is, life's pretty good that we're able to do and pick his event. Sometimes I think just taking a big step back and seeing the bigger picture as well, is like, we do this for fun. That's why we do it. We do it for a challenge. We do it for fun. And if these things become too all consuming, it's just not fun at all, or it overwhelms you, or it consumes you, then like, just, you need to probably reframe your thinking again, because these are things that are supposed to enrich our lives and make them better, not take it away from stuff. That would probably be my closing note.
That's wonderful. I think you've summarised what you've spoken about today in that closing component, and really drawing on not just your experience from the swim, but obviously across 20 plus years as an elite athlete. I think if people do take a step back and actually look at it, as you said, when we do these challenges as a challenge for enjoyment, we have a choice to do them. And we are in a fortunate position to actually be able to enjoy the beautiful ocean that we have out there. So thanks very much for taking time. I'm really glad that you are available to go through and speak about your experiences.
Thanks for having us on.
Flick, thanks again for sharing so openly today. Your perspective on navigating cancellations, injuries, and the long game in sport is generous and timely. My big take-homes from this conversation are: first, feel it, then refocus. The disappointment is valid, but it shouldn't define you. Second, fitness is never wasted. All that work goes into the bank, even if the race doesn't run. Third, control what you can, accept what you can't. Be flexible when plans change, and let resilience come from adapting, not forcing. If this episode helped, please follow the show, leave a quick rating or review, and share it with a swimmer or training buddy who might need it today. You can also send us your thoughts or questions for future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the water.